Hello, everybody. How is everybody doing? My name is Blake Floyd, and I am the marketing and brand manager here at Syssero. Thank you guys so much for being patient with us. We had some technical difficulties, but we got those handled. Anyways, I'm delighted that you guys have joined us for Sycero's very first empowerment webinar, where we're going to be discussing project management. We have with us Anthony Carpino, who is Sycero's resource manager, as well as a special guest, Phil Days, who is a senior Workday systems consultant. And Phil also has experience with Workday on the client side, as well as the consultant side. So if you guys would, let's welcome Anthony and Phil.
Hi there.
Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Doing really well.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well, thank you guys for taking time out of y'all's busy schedules to go over client management with us. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony and
Hey, Blake, I lost you there at the right at the end. I think it muted you, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into a presentation that we have today. So, looking at the agenda, we're going to go over the benefits of project management. I'm going to dive into some specifics around that, and really what project management provides from a resource standpoint, from a process standpoint, to clients and to projects. Going to go over the key components of project management. So we're going to talk through like the traditional phases of a project. Obviously, we have the Workday methodology. That's a framework that we work in. But regardless of that, right, every project goes through initiation, planning, execution. Managing through the deliverables and obviously close out, right? And then we're going to go through just different measures of project success, kind of what you can be on the lookout to identify as potentially failings versus success. And then just really specifically, you want to hone in on some things around Workday project management. So I think that's a solid agenda for the next 45 minutes or an hour, whatever we got. Okay, so taking a look at the benefits of project management, I think just generally when you are evaluating a project manager and project management, right, it's two things. It's a person and it's a system. So that person needs to be trained and skilled. That system needs to be established and followed. So early on, right, as a PM, you get the identification of functional responsibilities to ensure all those activities are accounted for on your project. And so what that really means is a PM, and the process of project management is logistics, right? It's coordinating your internal team, maybe your support team, whether that's a technical or functional team that you have that you've brought in, whether it's a consulting firm or people that you have internally that work within maybe your HRIS department. Project management does get the most out of one point of contact and somebody being sort of centrally located, all the communication flowing through them, and it tries to minimize the need for continuous reporting. You have one person where everything is flowing and tearing up to them. It's easy for management and leadership to get the story from that individual. Again, there's the people and the person part of this, where the individual you staff, and you need to be, I would say, diligent in picking that person. A lot rests on that person's shoulders, and then there's the process. A process doesn't just work without people enacting it, engaging it, holding it accountable. So that person needs to understand both their style and that process of project management. But identification of time limits for scheduling. So a PM's job there too is to help pull together all those stakeholders and understand what are the durations for this project. How long is it going to take you? You need somebody who can understand the requirements from both stakeholders, understand what he's getting or she is getting from the technical or the functional resources on the project. And that person can come to you, and if you have a need date where some project or initiative needs to get completed, they can back into that. They can tell you if it's reasonable, if you need more resources, but project management, it really it really encompasses, schedule, cost, scope, resources. It's all those things. And then a consistent methodology, that goes back to the process thing, right? You need a person to maintain that and to enforce that. But people like consistency, businesses like consistency. You don't want to necessarily operate differently week to week. You don't want a team of people leading. That's the saying, like too many chefs in the kitchen type thing, right? You need somebody to enforce it and keep it consistent. People understand, okay, what meetings are we having? What's expected of me in those meetings, and give it a flow. People don't like surprises, and that's the job of a PM as well, is to make everybody comfortable. People don't want to go into meetings and be sort of unaware of what's going to be asked of them. So, and early identification of problems is another benefit. That PM is really going to be in a lot of the calls, a lot of the meetings that you guys are having. He or she is going to have to be aware and listen to indications where there might be gaps or information's not being translated between stakeholders and consultants, or stakeholders and internal HRIS folks you have, or IT folks that you have doing the work. They need to be able to listen to that and pick up on that. And experience is a huge benefit to an individual trying to navigate that. Having seen breakdowns before in the past, it's as a PM, some of the best learning experiences you have are on red projects, challenging projects. So early identification of problems, that's a massive benefit to a company, bringing in a PM who can bring those to the attention and essentially build out mitigation plans and solve those and clear those problems before they become issues that affect your go live or whatever you consider your measure of completion on the project. And then lastly, knowing when objectives cannot be met. It kind of ties into the last bullet there.
Hey everybody, just a quick introduction of myself here. My name is Phil Days. Basically, since the early 90s, I've been building, implementing, or managing systems. I was introduced to Workday about 10 years ago when I was working for Sony PlayStation, and we were replacing our PeopleSoft system with Workday. And since then, I've been kind of going back and forth between running HRIS departments and consulting. So as Blake mentioned earlier, as Anthony kind of goes through the methodology of project management, my goal is to provide a little bit of color from the perspective of a client, and a client that happens to know a little bit about project management. So in terms of the benefits of project management, I'm actually going to take the perspective of the developer for a minute here, just to say that it's on the second bullet, this continuous reporting thing. It is really crazy making for developers, people doing the configuration, to be asked by 4 different people for status all week long. You're trying to get your work done and you just keep having to stop in order to provide these statuses. So a well-run project means that your configuration folks and the analysts are only spending 1 to 2 hours tops per week reporting the status, leaving them more time to get the important work done. And then from a client perspective, the biggest benefit of project management when it's done right is just ease of mind. When it's done right, it's going to lower my anxiety level because I know we're tracking to the plan, the issues are being dealt with. And even if things start to go a little bit sideways, we've got contingency plans, we've got mitigation in place. So it's really from a client perspective, a good project manager is going to give me confidence that everything is going to go okay and things are under control. Go ahead, Pete.
Yep, Blake, we can head to the next slide if you'd like. Okay, so this slide covers the key components of project management. Really, it's the stages of any given project. Again, I talked about the fact that we have the Workday methodology. That is a methodology of managing projects, but this is just generally what any project you have is going to move through. So whether you're watching this webinar to learn about Workday project management specifically, or if you're just learning how to manage maybe ERP projects or IT projects within your business, this is a good framework that applies to everything. And so you're going to go through initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and closure. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those. Project initiation is really where you're selecting the project. You're looking at potentially a register of lots of different things the business may need. You're going to prioritize. You're going to sort of establish the need of the business case for it, and you're going to select what project you want to do. And different projects could require different project managers. I will say that an experienced and a very strong and talented project manager can pretty much pick up anything. He's gonna or she's gonna rely on the team that they have around them effectively to manage that. But yeah, you're gonna select the project and really build out all the pre-planning types of things. So if that's getting sort of requirements, built, like I said, the business case for this project, selecting the project manager, deciding what the benefits of this project are going to be for the business, and then any preparation of documents, whether that's contractual things or you have to bring on vendors or hire people if you have any gaps, whatever it is. So that's going to be all your initiation stage, and some people kind of are not sure what the difference between initiation and then planning is. Well, planning, I mean, at that point, you've kicked off the project with your team. Your PM is on board, your key stakeholders are on board, and now that's where you're going to be building that timeline. You're going to be either backing into a need date, and you have a go live date, or an important business event that you have to manage to. That's the planning stage. So that's when you're going to be breaking down the scope of this project into very clear sort of either deliverables or tasks or whatever it is, getting that planned out. And there's different ways to plan a project. You can do the traditional like waterfall method where it's that Gantt chart schedule. Everything sort of moves methodically and chronologically to a completion. And a lot of folks these days are going to the agile methodology, and they plan that way through sprints and backlog, and that's a whole nother webinar session probably. But typically what you see, I think in most cases up to this point, will have been that waterfall planning. So you're going to get that schedule established. Everyone's going to agree to it, and you're going to set those important milestones and figure out, okay, what recurring meetings are we going to have each week? Again, the PM's coordinating all this. That's the logistic part of their job. What recurring meetings we're going to have, what determines that we get out of certain, I would say, like gates or phases of the project. How do we conclude that the planning stage is done? How do we conclude that, if you're using the Workday methodology, how do you conclude that, okay, we're going to have a sign off from, architect or, configure and prototype or test? Like, you need to establish all those parts. And so that's really more of a detailed plan, and that differentiates you from initiation. Phil, you want to add anything there on the client side? I mean, as far as like, if I'm the PM from a consultant firm or coming from the outside, I'm leading you all through that. And oftentimes there's a client side PM and there's a consultant PM. So if we role played here and I'm the consultant and you're the client side, we do work a lot in tandem and a lot in hand in hand, depending on the size of the project, right?
Right. Yeah. So the difference is the client project manager is typically in charge of more than just the implementation piece, right? They have to deal with change management. They got to deal with the training. They got to deal with kickoff and shutting down the old system and things like that. So there's a difference where they're more of a program manager. They've got a little bit broader, but they're counting on you to get this piece of it done, right? Because they've got more they need to deal with. So they really need you focused on get the product up and get it working. So I don't have to worry about that piece because I've got all these stakeholders and other things to manage. And one other thing I would just add here, when I'm training a new project manager, all this methodology is great, and Anthony's going to walk through it in detail and everything. But when new folks start to get overwhelmed, and if you're a new project manager and it feels a little bit overwhelming, I try to just break it down to 4 basic things. When you're a project manager, your job is to plan the work, is to make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to do and by when, hold them accountable, and adjust where needed, keep everybody informed of what's going on, and manage the risks and issues. That's it, 4 things. So if you're a new project manager or even an old one and things are feeling overwhelming because there's so much to do, if you can just do those 4 things well, you're doing your job.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about those stages. I would say the initiation and planning. You can make or break a project in those stages pretty easily. You know, a lot of people try to breeze through them. They just want to get started. They just want to get moving. And if that's the approach you take, you certainly will get started and you certainly will get moving. But take the time, take the care to plan. And that way, when you get into the execution stage of these things, you've kind of almost like done your homework. You have the answers for the team. You don't want to be doing planning when you get into execution. That's a recipe for failure, almost certainly. So execution, right? You've kicked off your timeline, your schedule, whatever you've built, whether you're doing like a waterfall type project or an agile project. Now you're in the execution stages. And so from a workday standpoint, that's going to mean now you're in your architect stages, doing your design sessions and your requirements gathering, and whether that's for a phase X implementation or a phase 1. But this is going to be everything after your kickoff meeting, again led by your project manager. And a good kickoff meeting, I want to make sure I address that too. A good kickoff meeting is going to take whatever the statement of work or the scope of work is that you have. It's going to be reviewed with the team. We all get cohesive around it. You're going to review the statement of work. You're going to review the timeline that you've built. You're going to review the team members, get everybody introduced, get everybody aware of who has what roles on the project. You're going to go through all the risks that have been identified early on, make everybody aware of them. And you're going to go over project logistics. What tools are we using for tracking and reporting on our work? What tools are we using for identifying risks? What tools are we going to use for creating test plans and signing off? Like all of that stuff gets covered in the kickoff. It needs to be thorough, and you're going to cover. Okay, here's all the meetings we're going to have. Here's the ones you attend if you're in these roles. Here's the work stream leads that you have, and here's the points of contact. And it's just a thorough kickoff, and then from that point on, you move into the actual execution of the project. So at that point, the PM really is just that central eyes and ears for everything. You don't want to have stakeholders interested in the success of this project having to go all the time to the lowest level person, get status, and you're going to lose things in translation. You need somebody who is sort of the hub for all this information that's coming through them, and that again with a good PM, somebody who's really risk aware. With that, you're going to have somebody who can hear all the different things going on to the team and make the interpretations on, wait a minute, this sounds like it's going to be a problem because I have the full, I have an umbrella type view over all the project. It's communication. It's without that, you're going to have risks pop up in different siloed parts of your project that other team members aren't going to be aware of. The PM needs to be copied on emails. They need to be in meetings that you have going forward. They need to be included on, I don't want to say like everything, but they really need to be involved. I mean, a PM's email should be lighting up generally, most of the time throughout a project, just so he's aware, she's aware. You're reading, you're scanning emails. You're not necessarily, I wouldn't say that you're always having something to say or participate, but you're aware. You're always involved. You can't just kick the project off and then have the PM not be in meetings. And I think sometimes, what you find is PMs get over allocated. They get on maybe multiple projects, and so they have to make decisions. I'm not going to go to this meeting, or I'm going to have to balance it. Right? You'll run into problems where the PM was not included, and so then as you execute, you may come and have an issue arise, and the PM's, well, I wasn't aware of that. Like that's the worst thing as a PM, right? You don't want to have not included or not aware. It is the crux that will make you fail. You have to be aware of these things. So, directing and managing the work. Yes, the PM knows sort of where all the boundaries are for the different team members. So as work comes into the project, the PM can determine if that's in or out of scope, right? Again, at kickoff, you establish what the scope for that project was. PM evaluates any new requests coming in from stakeholders. She says, this is in, this is out. If it's out, you either don't do it, get a change order, but that's how you stay on budget. That's how you stay on timeline. You don't intake work that was not intended. And there's always judgment calls, right? I mean, it's not, it doesn't have to be that rigid if you don't want it to be. You can say, all right, well, this does make sense. We're going to incorporate it. How do we fit it into the schedule? That's the judgment call for the PM, but it changes your project. It changes your timeline. It changes the burden on the resources to some extent. Whether you can absorb it, that gets flushed out in what the PM does, right? With his or her schedule, with his or her tools. And then working with the team members to help them improve. As a PM, you're going to see tendencies, habits, tools not being used. You got to keep everybody accountable in those cases. If you know that you're always on a meeting with that, and it always has tons of actions that come out of it, and you're like, well, you know what, we seem to be missing actions each week from this call. The PM is the one that steps up and says, you know what, we need to have at the end of this meeting a closeout process where we take notes, action register, something, right, where the PM is evaluating communication or process gaps on the project. They elevate a tool or a suggestion and hold everybody accountable to use it. So constant improvement, constant accountability. That's what a PM's job is, right? So it's that person and that process, and a person has to manage a process. So that's really what the PM does throughout the execution of this.
I think that's my cue. So back to the project planning piece, as Anthony mentioned, you don't go forward without a project plan. You got to have it. And from a client perspective, the question we always get is, what do you need from us, right? What you need to tell me what we need, even in the sales process to start. So what are you going to require from our side in order to get this thing done? So when you do your project plan, you have to include not just what your team's doing, but also what the client team is doing, especially in the requirements piece and the testing piece where they are heavily involved. So you have to make that really clear. And if you're using Microsoft Project or another tool, you don't just rely on the Gantt chart. You got to use your resource utilization reporting so you can tell the client, we need 80 hours of time during this week and 120 hours in that week, and make it super clear to the client what resource needs they are going to have, and have them sign off on that, because that can cause a project to go sideways in a hurry if the client isn't meeting their side of it. And when things start to slip, you don't want to be 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line pointing backwards saying, well, you didn't do this. Get in front of that and call it out as soon as it happens. We need this and we're not getting it. This is going to cause a slip if we don't get this right away. So project planning piece, super, super critical, and being very straightforward and communicating with the client what you need from them and getting them to sign off on that. On the monitoring and controlling piece of it, again, you don't want to be hitting your developers 3-4 times a day for status. That's a once a week thing, right? And you need to set up a cadence of weekly status reporting with your client and with your own team in a way that makes sense. So you are, as Anthony said, you need to be aware of everything, especially the issues and the roadblocks, so that you can do something about them and keep everything moving forward. So that weekly cadence of status reports is very important, understanding what's going on. And then again, just from the client side, nothing is going to upset me more as a client as not finding out about an issue until it's 3-4 weeks down the line, and I find out you were basically trying to fix it without me knowing about it. You failed to fix it, and now I'm finding out about it. And maybe it's too late to do anything about it, or we're way down the road. So resist the urge, and I am guilty of this. You have to resist the urge to try to fix things before somebody finds out, right? So if something goes wrong, oh crap, maybe we can fix this really fast, and then nobody will notice. Transparency is a way better approach. Just be honest about what's going on. Let the client know and say, hey, here's the issue. Here's what we're going to do, because chances are the client might have some ideas, or you get in a meeting and there's a brain trust of folks who can come up with a better answer than you can by yourself. So that transparency is going to build trust, and it's going to help to come up with better solutions than you might be able to come up with on your own. So if you're in doubt, talk to your supervisor or whoever. Say, hey, how can I communicate this in the best way? But trying to sweep it under the rug and get away with it is the worst thing you can do, because that's going to make a client more mad than anything. They'd rather know about issues than than have the sunny day scenario, always in the status meetings, and then they find out later something went wrong. So transparency is what I'm trying to get across there.
Yeah, and I don't have kids, but I imagine that being a project manager is a lot like parenting. So oftentimes things are not your fault, but they do become your problem. So as the saying goes, you can't always control your circumstances, but you can absolutely control how you respond to them. And I think that is what people expect of a project manager. Yeah, you're going to encounter things that you did not do, and I would say don't let pride get in the way. Again, that's with the transparency piece. Like, that was only going to I think in most cases it's going to come back to haunt you if you do try to hide things, right? If you do try to fix them and not talk about what just went wrong, right? But again, not your fault is your problem. It's an unfortunate phrase in the PM world, but it's kind of a motto that you end up living by. And then, so I was actually going to address the other half of that slide there. I wanted to give Phil a moment to talk. So yeah, you can go on back there one sec.
Oh, I'm good. I think we're on. Sorry, I'm looking at like 3 different screens here. So that was the monitoring control piece.
Yeah, I hadn't gotten to that one yet. So I was going to just hit that really quickly. So yeah, monitoring and control. So it goes sort of almost parallel or hand in hand with execution, right? I mean, with the monitoring and control aspect of this, this is where the PM comes in as far as like a reporting and a hub for information, and sort of reports back out to whoever his stakeholders are, her stakeholders are. They're going to have tools that track the progress, that communicate it clearly. They're going to have, a baseline schedule that you made. It's their job to compare it, right? Versus, okay, where are we? Where were we supposed to be? Analyzing variances and impacts. So, okay, we intook more work, or part of the scope had to be delayed. Sometimes you have to parking lot things, right? You're as you move through, things may not be able to get done in the time frame that you had planned. So, okay, here, this work can't be done. Here's the impact. The PM has to run that to ground, right? They can't just say like, well, we're not gonna complete this part of the project. Nope, you got to go. You got to get the information, talk to the stakeholders. What are the impacts? Okay, so since we won't have this implemented in time, what are we going to do to run in parallel? What are we going to do to accomplish the goals of this particular part of the scope, sort of outside of this project? And then making adjustments. Yeah, that's a broad statement, but always making adjustments. You're a leader. I mean, you're a leader of a team of people. They look to you for the guidance, for the recommendation, for the plan. You are a project manager, managing process and people, and managing to a scope, managing to a timeline. There's a lot of responsibility on you. Projects have all different sizes too, right? And one approach doesn't fit every project, right? So the more complex a project is, I would imagine the more complex of a structure of management you're going to have. But sometimes you don't need all of that, and a good PM is going to know when to make an adjustment, when a tool or a meeting or a process is overbearing, doesn't fit, with the style of the team. That's on you. If you put a bunch of rules in place and it's burdensome, that's on you. You have to react. You have to change your approach. And I think the more experience you have as a PM, the more comfortable you get making those calls. You can go on to the next one, Blake. Yep, project closure. So when you're busy, this gets ignored. You wrap up a project and it's on to the next thing, right? You think you're done, or you know, resources are like being pulled in a lot of different directions, and so this gets ignored almost as the planning and initiation stages can get ignored too. Sometimes I find you need to close out a project properly. You should have had at the beginning clear measures of what means complete, right? What is a measure of completion? What means we've accomplished the goals we set out to? So if at the onset the PM couldn't articulate, or the team could not tell the PM to articulate our measures of success, like that's going to be a problem, right? How do you know when you're done? So this ties back to the beginning. If you did a good job planning, you can go back and you compare and you can say, here was our scope, done, right? Close it out. Make sure that you've especially in like long projects, if you've been on a project for a year or 14 months, so many different objectives have popped up in that 14-month period, in that 6-month period, whatever it is. You know, you need to circle back and say, okay, did we complete where we set out those goals? Did we complete those? And are the things that we're still working on today, is this a new project? You know, do we close this one out? Like, do we button it up? You can't just have never-ending efforts, right? You have to have starts and stops on these things. So verifying that the work you set out at the beginning to complete is completed. If you need to start new projects based off of how things have evolved, spin off a new project, right? Change the team, get a new you know, scope, get a new timeline. But things need to have clear starts and stops. Contractual closure of the contract, that's gonna be more like you know, a lot of the things around like billing. You know, if you had resources that were external, right? The PM's job is to know all the contracts that you guys had with any vendors, all the contracts that you've had with potentially any consultants, or you know, any third parties that you brought in, right? So that's going to be, you know, did we bill? Did we close it out? PM goes and makes sure all those contracts are you know, at their end, and then project closure also could mean extension of some of those things. If you need to keep somebody on for a couple more weeks or months, the PM needs to be able to communicate that up to leadership and say, hey, I think we're in a good place. It's my evaluation that we need additional resources, additional time, whatever it is. So and then financial closure of the project. Yep, charge numbers. If you're using any sort of tool that people kind of track time to, get those buttoned up. Make sure that nobody's adding labor onto any of those projects past the end of that project. It's going to skew your ability to evaluate if you were on budget or profitable or whatever the goal of that project was. And then any closure of paperwork, yeah, that's going to be you want to have a project closeout meeting where you sort of put a bow on it, thank everybody, you know, for their efforts, you know, make any sort of announcements or recognitions that you need to make, and then really talk about what we learned. That's always like the lessons learned thing. That seems to really get a backseat. It's just the last thing people want to do is talk about like what we learned on this. But, you know, mistakes that you made on a project, you will make again if you don't identify them, learn from them, and then change something in the next time you approach a project. So if you have a lot of these repeatable projects or initiatives internally, change how you manage projects. You know, if there was a gap that caused one of your scope items to never make it to completion or got lost, I mean, how did that happen? So yeah, do a lessons learned. Just do a quick lesson learned, air it out. PM's job is to run that, gather those items, and give them back to the company, or him or herself implement them in changing your approach next time. So lesson learned type meetings and closeout is important. It sets you up for success the next time you go and do a project, right? So anything you want to say there from the client side on closing out a project from that perspective?
Yeah, so just a couple of things. So one thing to never underestimate is the cutover plan, especially if you're going from another system to Workday. And as an implementer, we're focused on the Workday piece, right? We're going to configure everything, and we got the reports, and everything is super tight, and we've tested it. It's awesome. You can have the best executed project ever, and then it just completely falls apart when it comes to the cutover, especially when payroll is involved. So even if we're not directly involved with the cutover, we have to make sure the client is thinking about it. And this last customer had a guy, his entire job was to manage the cutover plan. That was it. And it was a hard job because they had a ton of moving pieces. So just in short, don't underestimate the cutover plan. Get involved if you have to, but make sure it's looming large on the radar, because it's a super complex thing that has to get done, and it has to get done right, or the whole thing can blow up, especially when people aren't getting paid. So the cutover plan is huge, and I lost the other thing I was thinking about, so I'll come back to it.
Did we, and then Blake, do you want us now to to dive more into the specifics of like the Workday methodology? Can I spend a minute on that? Okay, yeah, I'll be really brief. So when it comes to Workday specifically, well, maybe not really brief, I'll try. When it comes to Workday specifically, there is a methodology that is tried and true, and I think there's a lot of good documentation out there on Community about it. There's training out there that you can take specifically on it, and I really, really want to urge anyone who is watching this to go find that. And maybe it's something that we can send out at the conclusion of this. We can find some of the community articles and maybe even post them or share them since it's relevant. But I think that following that process, it works, and it's flexible, it's iterative, it's just got a lot of, I would say, success in its execution over the years. So just as like a follow-on, I think we should provide a lot of that to clients. And I think any PM can take that documentation around with the Workday methodology and apply it if they've never used it before. It's not that, I wouldn't say it's not that hard to understand, but really, really important to follow that specifically when you're doing any sort of phase X or obviously a phase 1 implementation.
Okay, I remember the other thing. As in terms of project closure, what really makes clients nervous is, what am I going to do when you're gone? So again, this is not necessarily your job to make sure they're comfortable, but it kind of is, right? So during the project, if their folks aren't going to Workday training, make sure you're really pressing them. Hey, your payroll team needs to go to Workday training, because when we're gone, they're going to own this thing, right? Or the IT group or whatever it is. So kind of push the change management on them, and not just change management for users, but change management for the administrators and the folks who are going to own the system once we leave. So they will appreciate that when the project comes to an end and they actually know what they're doing, versus like, oh my goodness, you can't leave, which may be good for a little extra revenue, but it's not good for customer satisfaction. So that was the other thing. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Some of this is kind of obvious. Did you complete the project when you needed to, on time, from either whatever business event that drove your go live date or your project completion date and the timeline you set up? It's kind of binary. You did or you didn't, right? An easy measure of success. Did you do it on time? Did you do it within cost? Again, relatively binary. You either were or you weren't on cost. The PM having a good schedule that he or she can track to or baseline to is going to let you measure that success on time. A PM who is aware of the budget and managing it and adding to it as needed as you've got change orders, that will allow you to measure the success of a project, whether it's on or off of your budget cost. And then, did you have customer acceptance? Certainly if you've closed out a project, you would hope to have customer acceptance at that point. But how did that go, right? Did you fall? Did your project meet all the requirements? Were there things that never materialized as far as things they needed, things that maybe you had identified at the beginning that never happened, right? I would say that's more around like requirements, like accepted by the customer. I would probably rephrase that to say something more like, requirements were met. And then, did you utilize your resources effectively and efficiently? That comes back to time and cost, right? So it's sort of like a sub aspect of on time and on cost. But project success, those measures of success I was talking about, you establish them in the beginning, right? That's the initiation and planning. And I think, there's lots of different quotes you could probably go find around planning and preparation. They all apply. And if you don't know what success looks like, if you don't know where you're going, where you need to go, good luck getting there.
Just one thing we're running out of time. So just one thing to add real quick to this is, in my younger and less sensitive days, I was 100% focused on those first two bullets. And unfortunately, you can really burn people out doing that. So you have to balance people's lives and be sensitive to folks and not work them 12 hours a day for 3 months straight. Because you got the project done, but now nobody ever wants to work with you again. So you have to balance that as well, and you can't lean on client resources that heavily. So you have to use the client project manager to kind of manage that piece of it. So success is good. You want to be on time, on budget, all very important, but you do have to keep in mind you're working with people and you want to keep working with those same people. So don't kill them in the process.
Blake, how are you doing as a PM on your time? Are you managing us effectively?
Thank you. That is a perfect way to segue us into the Q&A, and I will say yes. And we actually do have a couple questions that have come in. So if you are okay with that, I'm going to go ahead and hop over to those. And if you haven't already sent in a question, feel free to use that chat feature there to the right of the video box, and I'll be able to monitor those and answer and get those questions asked of our lovely people here. So the first question that came in was, when do you know that a project is technically considered off track? And then how do you get it back on course?
Sure. Well, you went through a successful project planning stage. You have a timeline. It has the, I would say, the breakdown, the work breakdown of what needs to happen. You're going to have some hard milestones that are going to need to be met. So let's use the Workday methodology, for example, right? You're going to have an architect stage completion sign-off date that you need to make, right? The architect stage is going to be however long. Let's say that's a month long, just to be easy. A lot of activity is going to happen in parallel in that stage, but you have to be done, right? With your architect stage, you have to have requirements done to move into the next stage of the project. So having those milestones, right? Every time you miss a day on a task that you had planned, doesn't mean that you're off track, but you're going to have maybe 5 or 6 or 10 really important milestones that you identify as a PM. You work with the team. If those slip, then it pushes the rest of the project, right? Okay, well, we didn't finish requirements with this particular group in the business on time. Well, it's okay. Let's move it to next week. Now we have some requirements meetings stacked up. It's okay. We can do them in parallel. Doesn't mean the project's off track. We're still going to make that architect sign-off stage, right? I would say the best thing you can do is use milestones, important milestones that you are non-negotiable about to move on. If those start to slip, if lots of things stack up towards the end, and now you're pushing an architect stage sign off, that would be an easy way to sort of at an aggregate level look at, is my project on track, right? And Phil, I'll let you maybe give whatever approach you might use, but that would be mine.
Yeah, totally agree. If you've got a good solid project plan and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and by when, and they're starting to tell you, "Ooh, I'm not going to hit this date. I'm not going to hit this date." Like Anthony said, one miss is not going to throw off the whole project plan. But as you start to see, okay, well, if this is done this day, you've got dependencies in your project plan. You start to see what gets pushed. Okay, we're going to have to now do these in parallel, or so you have to make adjustments all along the way. And you kind of know, right? You know the minor slips versus major slips. And like Anthony said, when the big milestones start to have to move, now you're in trouble, right? Yeah. So try to get in front of it best you can. As soon as the little things start to slip, get right on it and make sure you got the support you need. You need another person in there helping out. Don't let the little stuff add up to be big stuff. Jump on it right away.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Great. So Anthony, Phil, thank you guys so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge with everybody. If anybody out there that watched this has any questions about Syssero or our service offerings, please follow our social media pages, send us a message there, or you can also email us at sales@syssero.com. Thank you guys again so much, and we look forward to advancing the solution and empowering you and your people in any way that we can. Anthony and Phil, thank you guys so much, and have a great rest of your day.
See you guys. Have a great weekend.